We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
A manager is only as good as the team he or she has around him, and for President Joe Biden, that adage signals a very grim future. Whether it's Vice President Kamala Harris being missing in action on just about every issue to cross her desk, whether it's a border crisis, a botched Afghan withdrawal, wherever one looks, it's disaster after disaster. Is this what you get for hiring activists to run your country? Well, to answer that question, we're joined by Liberty Nation author and editor, Mr. Jim Fight. Welcome aboard, Jim.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mark.
So tell me, has Joe Biden got a blind spot when it comes to putting activists in important government roles? It seems that the idea of a solid track record, experience in the field, is just a thing of the past, and all that matters is being loud and proud on any particular far-left issue that seems to raise its ugly head.
Well, I'll resist the temptation to make a joke about Joe Biden and blind spots, but no, I don't think this is a blind spot. Actually, I think the issue is rather that Joe Biden himself is an activist. He's not the most progressive guy. He's got an unfortunate history with women and race, to name a few things, but he is absolutely a statist and a globalist, and for that reason, he is and has always been an anti-gun activist. And of course, I don't think a solid track record has ever really been all that important to him. Now, the image of one, of course, but you ask, is this just about being loud and proud on all matters progressive? I think we've come to the point where that's it. He kind of has to kowtow to the progressive crowd, and that's great where their issues overlap, like gun control. And on pretty much anything else, I think he's just going to do whatever he feels like he needs to do for the party.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these recent nominations that have passed through the system. We can start with the former ATF nominee, Dave Chipman. Now, how could somebody who was so anti-Second Amendment even make it to a congressional hearing? I mean, surely with the Senate math that's in place, 50 on one side, 50 on the other, and Vice President Kamala Harris casting the decider, did they really assume that somebody with such an anti-gun record would gain all 50 Democrats without even a peep?
I suspect that is what they thought. And it speaks volumes, by the way, that it didn't work out that way, that the guy is so anti-gun that he offended even some Democrats. But yeah, that first question, the kind of off the cuff, easy answer is, well, you get nominated by a president. There you go. You're going to have your confirmation hearing. But the somewhat longer answer there is you got to think about what the ATF actually does. Right. The ATF, I believe I made this point in at least one of my articles that I talked about Chipman in. The ATF doesn't exist to make sure that you exercise your right to bear arms, right? Like no ATF agent's going to knock on your door and say, hey, do you have a firearm? Oh, here, take this one. That's not what they're here for. So
at least not until Christmas time, surely.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like the old joke, ATF, alcohol, tobacco, firearms. It should be a department store, not a government agency. But no, so it would have been most likely devastating to those who enjoy the Second Amendment had he been confirmed. But having said that, Chipman is at least in line with the agency's true purpose and Biden's own personal activism.
Well, speaking of being aligned with the agency's purpose, we have Chris Magnus in the hot seat for head of the Customs and Border Protection. Now, you wrote an article on Mr. Magnus with a good bit of background on him, and it seems to me that his history of supporting sanctuary cities is directly at odds with being head of a unit tasked with protecting the borders. So how does Mr. Magnus square this particular circle?
Well, he takes the same, he took the same tack as Chipman, actually. Just the old, I call it the Judge Dredd Act, right? Just I'm just going to enforce the law. It doesn't matter what the law says. I'm going to enforce the law. And of course, there is a special irony unlike Chipman and the ATF, to have an open borders, anti-border security, activist police chief who has refused to work with ICE to lead to lead an agency, dedicated to border security.
Yeah, it does. On the first day of Chris Magnus's hearings, he refused to call what's happening at the southern border a crisis. Now, it was quite the exchange. It was a fair amount of linguistic wriggling, as he says, well, I consider it very serious, but do you consider it a crisis? And he wouldn't dare utter the C word, the dreaded C word there. So how much confidence do you think let's call it the average American will have if he gets the job? Now, that's entirely up to the Senate, whether he does or not. But
Right.
what do you think the American people will think if there's somebody who is so anti-border
Well, I
in
like
charge of getting this whole thing organized? I mean, have I got this wrong? Or maybe the border issue isn't a crisis at all?
you keep on with that C word there, Mark. I like how he danced around that. He would address this with a sense of urgency, all the urgency it deserves. It's a very serious issue, but no, he wouldn't say crisis.
That's an
Uh,
interesting point there. All the urgency it deserves. Now,
mhm.
who determines how much urgency it deserves? Well, that would be the head of the Customs and Border Protection, surely. So if he doesn't see it as a crisis, then perhaps it doesn't require urgency. So he would be dealing with all the urgency that it deserves as determined by himself, correct?
Like you said, there's some linguistic gymnastics going on there. Uh, so completely setting aside for a moment the the issue of the left wanting open borders, I think, and this is neither for or against the man. This isn't an indictment or a praise or anything, but he's kind of in a situation where even if he did believe that there was a crisis at the border, and I don't think he does. I think he's right along with the rest of the leftists who want the situation to be like it is, or just completely open border. But let's assume for a second that they ask, a senator says, "What are you going to do about the crisis on the southern border?" And he says, "You know what? You're right. It is a crisis, and I'm going to work to adjust it." Well, now he has just thrown everybody under the bus in his entire party, including the man who nominated and can fire him. Um, as far as what confidence will the American people have in him, that's going to decide who you voted for, right? Because if you voted for Joe Biden, then you're kind of in the same boat as Biden, as Magnus, and as the Democrats in Congress. You have two options. You can either say, hey, look, we screwed up, now we got to fix it. Or you can, as the saying goes, continue to play the fiddle while Rome burns and just pretend like there's no problem.
Yeah, I've noticed that many of the politicians nowadays, in their bios, they have, before even congressperson or senator, they have activist and congressperson, or activist and
Right.
congresswoman or congressman. And this seems to be more of a priority for them. And I think it's great that people who are personally invested in a cause so much that they consider that activism, they consider politics a way of pushing forward with their activism for the cause they believe in. However, the issue there, I think, is once they become elected, they're on the taxpayer dollar. And that dollar, they're being paid to be a congressperson or a senator rather than an activist, because they don't just represent the people who voted for them, they represent the people of the entire constituency. Do you see a conflict of interest there?
And that was kind of a sticky wicket. Personally, I think that anyone positioning themselves as an activist in Congress should be terrifying to the common people. Um, and look, this is people like Tracy Stone Manning, people like David Chipman, people like Chris Magnus, people like our Attorney General Merrick Garland. They're exactly why. Senators or representatives who introduce laws that will seriously curtail liberty for the greater good. They're why. But for a lot of people, a lot of these activist voters, that's great. Of course it's not a problem. Of course it's not a conflict of interest. It lines up perfectly with their interests.
Yeah, all must fall to the greater good. James Fight, thank you ever so much for being here.
Thanks, Mark.
Right after this short break, we're talking liberty with Scott Cosenza. Will the attorneys general letter to Joe Biden over labeling good parents as domestic terrorists have any impact at all? Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.